We're about to begin, so if I can have a little quiet, I'm going to introduce our wonderful presenter today. I'm really excited to have Melisa Köroğlu with us today to present her talk, To Eat Excessively, Female Hunger, Appetite, and Consumption in the Horror Film. Melisa Köroğlu is a doctoral student at the American Studies Department, University of Cologne. Her talk, To Eat Excessively, Female Hunger, Appetite, and Consumption in the Horror Film, is part of her dissertation project, which focuses on the depiction of female bodies and eating patterns in contemporary American horror films, and how these visualizations reflect sociocultural, patriarchal ideologies and stigmata of the female body, beauty standards, and, excuse me, sentences are long sometimes.
That's my bad.
You're fine. Okay, so these reflect sociocultural, patriarchal ideologies and stigmata of the female body, beauty standards, and internalized demonization of female indulgence and desire. Not the food, but the consumption, and the framed consuming mouth is the central focus of her research. So please give a warm welcome.
Sarah, do you know what's making that noise?
I think it's maybe still connected or something, because it's like giving sounds. Can we turn it off?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
I think it's the creepy dolls.
The dolls might be causing some interference. We have cursed baby dolls on the windowsill, so
Yes.
if something uncanny happens in here, oops.
If you go by the talk, just look at the dolls. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming. Thanks a lot to the festival for having me here. I'm very excited. I was here last year as just a guest, and now I'm here as a presenter, so that's pretty cool and very exciting. As already mentioned, I'm currently writing my PhD in American Studies. So my PhD dissertation focuses on American horror films, but for the sake of fun, I included some non-American horror films in the talk here as well, just because it's fun. So this is part of my dissertation project where I looked at how contemporary horror films depict eating patterns, consumption behavior, suppression of appetite, and suppression of hunger. And when we look at horror films, in general, the idea of eating is presented mostly through monstrous eating, and then we have cannibalism, and then we have the eating of foreign objects that is not considered food in a lot of horror films, and that is then considered monstrous. But what I'm looking at mostly is we have female characters, some of those you see on screen, and those female characters undergo a transformation. And during this transformation, their eating patterns and their behavior to food and to appetite and to hunger changes. And I wondered why that is. Why is that when these female characters are human, they have a certain type of behavior towards food, and when they are fully monstrous, this changes. And this I then connect to sociocultural, patriarchal ideologies of the female body. And as I'm doing North American studies in my PhD, I'm connecting this to American society and diet culture and body ideals and beauty standards. This is kind of the broad overview of the topic. First, I kind of want to clarify, or not clarify, but I want to give a little explanation to the language that I'm going to be using, as this is a queer festival, rather a festival that focuses on a lot of queer media. In horror films, when it comes to female characters, it's very easy to fall into an essentialism and even TERF territory. So I know that the world is not separated in a binary of gender experience when it comes to food and when it comes to consumption. So when I refer to female hunger and scream, I do not voyage into cis normativity, and I do not want to even consider including TERF ideologies. But when talking about bodies, it's interesting. What I found out when I was looking at these films is that numerous contemporary horror films, they follow a specific pattern. I recognize this pattern. So what I'm implying with my talk right now is not every single female character is like this, but most of them are. And those films that I looked at follow this specific pattern. And as a scholar, I can only work with what I have been given, so I'm not an artist, I don't make films. But I look at them and then I dissect them. And while there is a rise in queer media, especially in horror as well, which is why festivals like these are really cool, that because they introduce us to new horror media, for the most part, the films that we look at on the norm and also the most successful horror films out there, they follow this very specific pattern. And yes, this specific pattern of female characters consuming in a very specific way and suppressing their appetite. So I'm looking at the Hunger Girl, who is not an essential archetype, but rather a recognized pattern. And when we see films from specific places around the world and from specific times, we can realize that these films reflect society. And horror films reflect societal fears and anxieties. And when I was looking at these films, I saw a specific pattern regarding the Hunger Girl. And so I was wondering, why is a woman that is fully satiated so terrifying that these films turn her monstrous? And that is, first of all, my talk. These are some of the films I'm going to be talking about. If you want to dive into what I'm looking at, this is a list. These are all the films that I'm looking at in my dissertation, and take pictures. And as you see, I have some films on there that are not North American, so these are probably not what I will be looking at during my dissertation, but again, for the sake of this talk, I included them. Okay, cool. Also spoilers, like if you have not seen these films, I will be spoiling some of these films, I'm sorry, but nevertheless, please watch them all, every single one. Yeah, okay. So, I'm going to do a little dehydration break. Okay. So, as a film scholar, I'm not only looking at films and dissecting them, like, oh, what angle are they using, what lighting are they using, what editing are they using, music, sound, da-da-da-da. I'm also connecting these findings that I have, these film analyses findings, to cultural and sociocultural and political ideas and stereotypes. So, as an American studies scholar, I looked at how does the US deal with food and with the body and consumption. And this kind of framework I'm going to present to you guys first, and then I'm going to connect these findings to the films, kind of as case studies. So this is going to be a lot of theory. Not theory, but a lot of information. So, is it human to starve? That's a very broad question that I'm using in my dissertation, and by starving and starvation, I do not mean on the brink of death, survival, but rather the choice to suppress hunger and appetite, the choice to rather not eat. And this is what a lot of people include in their food studies approach as well. Right, and at the end we have a little Q&A session, if you want. If not, I can continue talking. Okay, so as I already mentioned, the choice is really important in this matter. So not simply being hungry, but to decide to feel hunger is an innate female experience. And feminist scholars agree that hunger is often pathologized, socially monitored, and culturally vilified. For example, to be female, to be hungry, Kim Chernin. The hunger for food is just one of body's appetites. By Susan Bordeaux, Puritans regarded the soul as feminine and characterized it as insatiable, Elizabeth Rice. Female hunger has long been a powerful cultural metaphor for female power, desire, and sexuality, Ellen Driscoll. In Appetites by Woman 1, Caroline Knapp examines the deeper connection between hunger and desire, focusing on how societal norms shape female appetites. Knapp's perspective exposes how internalized guilt and shame, stemming from patriarchal ideas and industrial diet culture, govern a female body's relationship to food. Women are made to feel that hunger and natural bodily function, and that they are made to feel that hunger and natural bodily function is somehow inappropriate and pure. Women are conditioned to view hunger not just for food, but also for self-fulfillment as something shameful, sinful, and in need of restraint. again, this is not at all going into cis-normative ideas of women, but rather socially constructed. So, shame was used as an instrument of the Puritan Church to shackle women and control their desires for agency and autonomy. Is anybody familiar with the term Puritan or Puritanism? Okay, so for those of you who are like, what the hell is that? Again, American studies scholars, so the Puritan Church was kind of created when the first settler colonialists arrived or settled on the North American continent. They had some discrepancies with the church in England, so they were like, let's go there, and started their land, started their life. And basically, to sum it up, Puritan ideology was excess is really bad, and you are born a sinner, and you have to undergo a lot of rules to kind of make up for that in this church. It was a very patriarchal church, and everything that was deemed unnecessarily too much was sinful. And the woman was considered sinful as well, because obviously Eve. And so this Puritan idea is still very much present in contemporary North American society, which is where we find this shame of indulging in excess, mainly in women, not really in men. We see that in films, for example, most of the time, not horror films, but all of the films, when we have characters eat. And for men, it's like very normal to just eat food, but for women, it's always kind of this idea that they're considered a comedic relief when they eat something other than salad. And then we have this cool girl monologue in Gone Girl where it's like, oh, she's a cool girl, she eats pizza, but she stays a size 2. Like, this is how films in general, North American films, they work with the body, they work with female body, they work with consumption, they work with eating patterns. And this is how Puritanism is still very much connected. And so they try to control and almost govern the female body and how women eat. And this mechanism of control continues to resonate today. Shame and female consumption are marketed towards women, insecurity and judgment exploited by diet culture industries. And in her article, Hunger, Representation of the Female Body, Ellen Driscoll argues that the female body is a site of both shame and of transformation. And it suggests that indeed women embody shame for the culture just as they incarnate possibilities for its transformation. So Driscoll argues that women's internalization of patriarchal standards of bodily acceptability is central to the experience of bodily shame and self-hate. So this suggests that today's patriarchal society maintains a structure that benefits from continuing shaming of women. After all, a shamed, insecure woman is the ideal consumer for diet culture industries, because shamed women do not seek agency and bodily autonomy. Okay. So in my dissertation and in this talk as well, I'm not only looking at the physical act of eating, like this kind of behavior, this physical act of eating, of swallowing, of consuming, but I'm also looking at this metaphorical idea of hunger, which I refer to as allegorical hunger. So this desire, this bodily desire for autonomy, for agency, for warmth, for regardless what these women want, regardless what these characters want. And it's really interesting because a lot of scholars have also connected this idea of hunger to bodily desire. For example, in an article, Eve was framed, Food and Sex and Women's Shame, Annie Furtland states that sex and eating are about meeting needs. And whereas men are encouraged to meet their needs, women are defined as need meters, whose own needs are usually denied or subverted. Well, we do have needs. It's only that we aren't allowed to acknowledge them. Faking orgasms is like saying we've had enough to eat when we haven't. and both are a result of feeling ashamed of having these needs. Or women's relationship with food is all too often ambivalent and frequently fraught, reflecting our feelings about our bodies and our sexuality. The female body is continuously rendered a social ground for judgment, discourse, and control. Fear of the female body biologically and symbolically stems from patriarchy, in which men are considered the norm and women are judged for their otherness. As Simone de Beauvoir states, he is the subject, he is the absolute, she's the other. Violeta Polinska argues that food is the first source of self-harming and self-mutilation a girl chooses, as food was the resource that women controlled. They found it easier to renounce eating than anything else. As food was tied to women's invisible domestic labor, it became an easy source of power to manipulate, whether through refusing food themselves or adding unknown substances to dishes. Women exerted control over food. It is no coincidence that women historically favored silent forms of violence like poisoning to harm others. This was kind of the overview, my framework. Hope you're all with me. We're going to get to the fun stuff now. So, how is this hunger that these scholars looked at portrayed in horror films? And before we look at that, let's look at the characters, and let's look at the girls that we're looking at, and they are referred to as monstrous feminines, which maybe some of you already know the term. Let me just quickly drink. Barbara Creed, a film scholar, published the text The Monstrous Feminine in the 1990s. Her work is significant for horror film scholarship as she introduces the monstrous feminine. The monstrous feminine is the female monster on screen, and Barbara Creed introduces this term because she states the male monster on screen is monstrous because he is a monster. The female monster is monstrous because she is a woman. Her monstrosity is always inherently connected to her female body and to her womanhood. For example, and she lists a couple of archetypes. We have the witch, we have the vampire, we have the monstrous womb, we have castrating femme, we have a lot of different archetypes, but every single one of these characters, their monstrosity comes from their bodies, comes from their productive organs, comes from their sex. And this book was written in the 1990s. She later on published a rereading of The Monstrous Feminine. But while I do appreciate the term and why I'm using it, and Barbara Creed is amazing, and what she does, it does it does suggest this idea of, oh, womanhood is when you can give birth. Oh, womanhood is when you menstruate. And again, this is very much why a lot of horror film scholars that work with bodies and work with, for example, menstruation, fall into turf territories. And I'm just going to clarify, that is really not good. So, for example, Carrie got her period and then she got monstrous. We have Rosemary's Baby, where she is able to give birth and thus she is monstrous. We have the mother in Psycho. We have all these female characters that are staples in horror films, and their monstrosity comes from their female body. And this is sometimes essentialism, and it's not too good. So I kind of just want to clarify that I criticize this. The frequent alignment of female monstrosity with female reproductive system and biological processes like menstruation, pregnancy, and menopause reinforces a trans-exclusionary, cis-normative, and misogynistic perspective that equates gender with sex. By making menstruation or the female reproductive system the source of monstrosity, horror films inevitably suggest that to be female is to be defined by one's biological functions, while also demonizing these functions. So when I'm talking about female bodies on screen, I'm not talking about reproduction organs or whatever. I'm talking about the socially constructed female identity that we see. So, How are we feeling so far? This was a lot of information. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna see people eat. No, I'm gonna talk a lot. In her article, Recreational Terror, Postmodern Elements of the Contemporary Horror Film, Isabel Pinedo describes how bygone horror films exemplified a clear binary narrative structure, whereas contemporary horror films blur these lines and offer a juxtaposition of binaries, such as boundaries between living and dead, normal and abnormal, human and alien, and good and evil. These are blurred in contemporary horror films. The female monster, or the monstrous feminine, is thus in this grayscale of juxtaposition. These films that we watch right now, and contemporary, and for contemporary I mean timeline-wise like 2010 starting up, or 2000 starting up, they do not fall into this black and white scale of she is evil, she is good. They are complex characters, ambivalent characters, a bit of both. They're like, I don't know, good for her films, for example. You know, we kind of support that. But also, it's wrong. And in her 2018 article, Forgive Me, Father, for I Have Sinned, Ashila Chatterjee argues that the female monster, in essence, is still a victim. Their monstrosities is a byproduct, for the most part, of their gender, and they are prey as well. So these characters are neither solely monster nor solely victim, but a blur mix of both. They haunt while being haunted. They are monstrous feminines. And this is really interesting because they are victims first, because as monstrous feminines, they are always considered a symbol of patriarchal disruption and fear to patriarchy. I think I forgot to mention that. Okay. So what's really interesting is how a lot of times when it comes to horror films, we have something that is disgusting, right? We have bodily fluid, we have blood, we have disgusting behavior, and especially when it comes to food, we have this idea of just like tearing into something. That is considered disgusting, that is considered impure. And purity is something that these characters work against. So we have, again, this idea from the Puritan church that the woman is supposed to be pure and she's not supposed to indulge in excess. Eve, as the first woman who sinned by eating the forbidden fruit, dared to satiate her urges, her appetite, her desires to taste. She was punished for eating, and a punishment has become a heritable curse, influencing every woman in experiencing the same desire to satiate the appetite and the craving. Throughout history, the act of eating, of indulging in hunger and desire, has often been framed as a transgression for women. But with this legacy of heritable hunger comes the profound awareness of the social consequences, the knowledge that punishment awaits after each taste, each bite, each swallow. And this punishment is monstrosity. In these horror films, the punishment for eating is monstrosity. The punishment for indulging in your desires and your appetite is monstrosity. The pattern I previously mentioned is the following. The girls in horror film undergo a transformation. We have films where the girl at the beginning of the film, she starts out as fully human. And then through a external force, they become monstrous. And that can be, for example, like in Carrie, menstruation, or in a lot of other films which, for example, Jennifer's Body, which I'm not going to mention, but it's like an external force, you know, it's like, oh, there's a ritual, and now suddenly she's a demon. Or in a lot of other films where we have a vampire bite, we have a werewolf bite, like these are external forces that put monstrosity on these girls. And the second they come in contact with this monstrosity, there is this shift in their behavior. Previously, they were not interested in indulging in their bodily desires, so sexual desires, or in consumption, hunger, appetite. But the second they turn monstrous, they indulge in consumption for the first time. Their hunger, which co-aligns with bodily desire, for example, becomes an overbearing bodily craving. In their final act, these films show that when fully monstrous and not at all human, these monstrous feminines are finally given the opportunity to satiate their hunger fully. They are only full when they're fully monstrous. These films do not allow the monstrous feminine, even when slightly still considered human, to satiate her hunger. When human, she is to stay hungry. Only when she reached the full monstrosity, only then is she allowed to satiate her appetite and consume gluttonously and voluptuously. Horror films, with their visceral engagement with bodily appetite, provide thus a unique lens to explore this dichotomy of desire and repression. This underscores society's long-standing obsession with female bodies, caught between voyeuristic appreciation and exploitation, and the desire to shame the female body, maintaining a toxic idea of purity. In horror films, hunger is often portrayed as an animalistic urge connected to gluttonous carnage, violence, and monstrosity. So it's... Yeah, sorry, I skipped this. So these girls' hunger is not just their literal craving for food, but also a metaphor for female autonomy and defiance of patriarchal control. I argue that this hunger girl is thus punished with monstrosity for fulfilling her appetite. In a satiated state, the hunger girl disrupts patriarchal norms by welcoming and embracing gluttony. She eats disgustingly so. By denying the male gaze, the hunger girl consequently morphs into monstrosity, as horror films visualize that a girl can never be human and satiated. Wait, what is happening? Oh, okay. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the films. As I already mentioned, I kind of categorize these findings into either physical, literal depiction of hunger, so where people really eat, and then also this allegorical, where people just desire something. And these are just broad two categories that I have. I'm briefly going to talk about literal hunger first, and I'm going to explore allegorical hunger next. And I have a couple of films that I'm going to talk about briefly, and I'm going to give plots for the films, so spoilers, I guess. But also watch them still, because they're really cool. Yeah. So as I already mentioned, when horror film scholars look at hunger in horror films, which is not a lot do that, so fun for me, I can do this, a lot of them look at what is consumed. For example, cannibalism. That's a big topic, especially in the last couple of years. We have really great films. We have Raw, we have Cannibal Mukbang, which is up here, which is an amazing film, and then we have Bones and All, which is coming of age, but also cannibalism. And these films kind of align monstrosity with a very gender-neutral monstrosity. We have, for example, Hannibal Lecter, right? You know, cannibalism is very much gender-neutral. So this is very interesting. I'm not going to talk about it, though, because I don't focus on what is consumed, but rather how it is consumed. But nevertheless, cool films. And if you want to talk about cannibalism films, we can do that too later on. I just kind of want to briefly mention. Also, this quote is from the screenplay from Jennifer's Body, and I'm so sad it's not in the film because I love it. If you can't read it, it says, "Jennifer didn't always look this rough. Actually, she was the prettiest girl in Devil's Kettle when she wasn't so hungry." Devil's Kettle is the city. Okay, so literal hunger. Let me hydrate. So as already mentioned, literal hunger is what you imagine. When you think of hunger in horror films, when you think of eating and consumption in horror films, these examples come up. It's women tearing into flesh. It's women eating and ripping a body apart. It's very bloody and gory and almost animalistic and very monstrous. And I look at the following three films. I look at Ginger Snaps. Over there. No, there. I look at A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night and Humanist Vampire Seeking Consenting Suicidal Person. The latter two films are vampire narratives that do not actually fall under the category of horror films, but they have horror elements. So what's really interesting is in Ginger Snaps you have this coming of age, coming of rage story where the girl's monstrosity is reflecting her coming of age process. The monstrosity and her metamorphosis into it is directly linked to an increase of appetite in human flesh and sexual desire. Whereas A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night from now on referred to as Girl Walks Home and Humanist Vampire, are both cinematic vampire narratives where the monstrous feminine struggles with her internal moral compass, harming and attacking people and seeing them as prey. This paradox occurs when the predator starves herself and represses her appetite to maintain humanoid, humanist traits. So first we're going to talk about Ginger Snaps, and this Ginger, she has a younger sister, and it's basically about the two of them. So Ginger Snaps revolves around two teenage outcast sisters, Bridget and Ginger. The sisters despise normativity and the ordinary middle-class Americana life in the suburbia, opening with the gruesome death of numerous pet dogs around the neighborhoods. The film introduces the lycanthrope early on. So we know there is a werewolf, and the film is also aware of that, so it's canon. Ginger, older than her sister by 1 year, menstruates for the first time on one of their nightly strolls, where they come across the still warm body of a dog that was just butchered by this monster. And first they think that the blood on her leg is because of this dead dog in front of them, but then Ginger realizes that this blood comes from herself, and she has got the curse, which is what she used to describe this. Apparently, smelling the blood from Ginger, she's then attacked by a lycanthrope, sorry, spoiler, and turned into a werewolf. So this transformation into a werewolf is directly linked to her first menstruating cycle. It's very interesting. And then we have, wait, 1 second. As Ginger changes physically and her personality shifts, Bridget seeks a cure for her sister's curse, the lycanthrope one, not the menstruation one. The film culminates with Ginger fully transformed by the next moon, and, spoiler, Bridget, after killing her sister in self-defense, embracing her dead sister's lycanthrope form. So, in Ginger Snaps, Ginger's hunger drives her monstrous metamorphosis, instrumentalizing her appetite as a catalyst for its transformation into monstrous feminine. Ginger is the typical outcast girl. She's not interested in other people, she's only interested in her sister. It's also on YouTube, the film, by the way. And the second she gets bitten, she has this rising drive of sexual desire, which you can either say comes from her menstruating for the first time. Also, there's a scene where she's going away with a boy, and her sister is not really happy about that, so she's screaming, oh, she's ovulating, which is very funny. And this is really interesting because then we have the scene where Ginger is in the car with said boy, and they make out, and she's ripping apart his clothes, and she's just telling him, I could eat you alive, and we think she might have, but it turns out she just bit him, and thus he has a curse as well. So this physical hunger to eat somebody in this film is directly linked to her monstrosity and to her sexual desire. She wants to consume this person. What we don't know, is it because she suddenly has a labia? Is it because she is suddenly a werewolf? And this is what consumption is like in this film. And then she never really indulges in eating when she just turned monstrous. In the beginning of the film, we have her, the scene, not really eat. She just kind of is pushing her plate away. She doesn't want to eat what her mother cooked. And then with the rise of her sexual drive, with the rise of this lycanthrope curse, and with the next moon coming, she has this urge to eat. And she is attacking people, sorry, spoiler, but never fully eating and consuming them. Only after she is fully monstrous, which is when she looks like this. And she's not hot anymore, and she's not pretty anymore, and she doesn't fall under the male gaze. And this is the only time when the film finally allows her to eat and to satiate her hunger and her appetite, because she's not considered human anymore. Because humans or women on screen are never allowed to be full. Only when she looks like this, she's allowed to be full. Only when she looks like this, she is given the opportunity and the ability to satiate her hunger and her appetite. But then she's a monster. Fully. No human traits whatsoever. And this is really interesting. These human traits, as you think back of the quote that I had, to be female is to be hungry, this is a human trait. And Ginger Snaps kind of follows this narrative, like similarly to maybe Raw and to Jennifer's Body, where you have in the beginning of the film you have her not monstrous, but at the end of the film you have her fully monstrous. Gonna give you 2 examples now where this is not the case. So, I didn't just like pick the best films for my theory. And the first film is A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. Great film. Amazing film. One of the best films on this earth. Follows a girl who is a vampire. A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, or A Girl Walks Home, it tells a story of a veiled vampire referred to as the girl in the fictional Iranian town Bat City. On a nightly skateboarding strolls, the girl encounters and drains various men from the city. Her encounters with men are shifting balances in power. We have scenes like this very top picture where she's meeting these men on empty streets, and first we might be scared for her, but then she is a vampire and then she kills them. And she always kind of gives them the opportunity to be the better person and walk away, but the second she realizes these men, they indulge in rape culture behavior, she attacks them and kills them. So she chooses to prey on men who exploit women, highlighting the film's rape revenge structure and critique. While the girl attacks men who misuse their power, she also scares one young boy, aiming to instill fear in the next generation. The film introduces Arash, a poor boy living together with his addict father, as the girl's love interest, and they both experience solitude together. So this is really interesting because 2 things. First of all, vampire films that center around a female vampire have always been very much male gaze, homoeroticized. To have a vampire film with a heteronormative or heterosexual love story doesn't sound like it, but it's progress. So this is actually really interesting. She also has an ongoing friendship with a sex worker whom she saves, and with the relationship and the friendship to these 2 people, she experiences human emotions for the first time. And there are scenes where she is almost on the urge of biting Arash 2 times, but she is deciding against it. She has this animalistic urge to bite him. She is the predator and he is the prey, but she decides against him. Much like in this scene, where she is deciding against biting him and thus embracing him. And this is really interesting because it comes over the course of the film, and we have these scenes, we have her kind of experiencing human emotions for the first time in this kind of zwischenmenschlichkeit, kind of like human interconnectedness, where she is realizing, oh, to have another person in my life, either as a friend or a love interest, maybe is a good thing. And while she's experiencing this, she is gaining these humanoid, humanist, humanesque traits. And when she is gaining these humanesque characteristics, she is suppressing her hunger. So again, to be human is to not fully satiate your appetite. Okay, I'm good with time. So this, by starving herself and denying herself food and satiation, so she amplifies the humanoid side with this kind of complex moral compass that she then incorporates. This notion is particularly poignant when considering how hunger and satiation are portrayed in these films. Hunger becomes a symbolic stand-in for not only the regulation of physical desire, but also the policing of female autonomy. And then we have one other film that I kind of want to talk about briefly. It's Humanist Vampire Seeking Consenting Suicidal Person, written and directed by Adrien Seyss in 2022. Great French-Canadian film, which focuses a similar, I think, narrative. We have vampire-born Sasha, who, when she was a child, had a traumatizing birthday party where she realizes she actually has sympathy for humans, and thus she's not able to bite humans, and she is surviving on these blood bags. But at one point her parents decided to cut her off and tell her you have to bite humans to survive, and she's like, I can't do that. So she decides to die and go to this survival support group where she meets suicidal Paul, who is like, hey, I want to die anyway, you can just bite me. And through this kind of coming of age typical roam through the night, we have a lot of adventure. She realizes she cares for him, and when she realizes she cares for him, she cannot actually bite him. And this again kind of signifies what I have been mentioning. When you have human feelings, you suppress your appetite and you stay hungry. Also great film. All of these films are great. Okay, allegorical hunger is what happens when these women, these girls, they crave warmth, agency, autonomy. And to fulfill these wishes and dreams and desires, they have almost this bodily urge to fulfill them. And these characters are driven to monstrosity because they chose to fulfill these desires. And a great example for that is 2015's The Witch by Robert Eggers, which some of you might have seen. I think it's, pretty well known. But let me just briefly run through what it's about. The Witch, more folktale than a story, follows a Puritan family, there's Puritan again, being exiled from the New England colony due to discrepancies, to living near the woods. And the woods are referred to as the unholy land in the film. This misfortune, and their misfortune, begins as the youngest son, Samuel, vanishes under the care of the oldest daughter, Thomasin, who is our protagonist. Later, it is revealed that the family is being haunted by a witch couple nearby who stole Samuel for their ritual. The family falls into misfortune after misfortune after misfortune, which leads them to accuse Thomasin of it all. She's scapegoated into being a witch as well, and to bring calamity onto the Puritan family. As the teenage adolescent, as the female adolescent, she's obviously the most sinful of them all, so she's being scapegoated into being the reason why everything fails. Their crops fail, their dog and horse go missing, and the oldest son dies after being lost in the woods. And the film ends, spoiler, with everybody dead except Thomasin, who just killed her mother in self-defense. And then she is revealed to never actually being a witch, but because she happens to find herself in a situation where she doesn't know what to do, she decides to join the devil's coven, who then actually invites her, and then she becomes a witch. So, the female hunger in The Witch, both physical and allegorical, acts as a crucial catalyst, which then triggers Thomasin's transformation into a monstrous feminine. Oh, wait. Yes. So what's really interesting with The Witch is that we have her being asked this question at the end of the film when she asks the devil, can I join you? And he's like, would thou like to live deliciously? And Thomasin answers, what can thou give? And then he answers, well, what do you want? And this is a really interesting dialogue because we can imagine that Thomasin, in her very secluded way of upbringing, a secluded Puritan family, she's not even capable of imagining everything that there is in this world that she could have. So by asking the devil, well, what can you give? She has this opportunity to reach everything in her power and to kind of gain a lot, which she was not allowed to do so because Puritanism, as already mentioned, they thought excess was the most sinful of it all. These are a couple other films that I think are really interesting when it comes to allegorical hunger, and interestingly, they're all period pieces. A combination of neglectful upbringing and repression of female agency, desire, and autonomy over her body results in a girl's starvation for allegorical satiation. Period or elevated art house horror films like das Teufelsbad, the witch, Aquelarre, and the other lamp implore a religious oppressive patriarchal force to dim the monstrous feminine satiation. Coincidentally, the witch and Aquelarre impose a witch accusation narrative, which evoke patriarchal fear of female autonomy and agency. In Aquelarre, a group of young girls is being accused of witchcraft after they simply gathered in the woods and danced and drank. These simple pleasures of life, again, a simple pleasure which can be considered excessfully and excess and unnecessary in a way, are being denied as fulfilling these desires means that they are witches. Sure. The film depicts allegorical hunger in close connection to religious fanaticism, which we also find in The Witch and partly in The Teufelsbad, but very much so in The Other Lamp, which is about a cult. Great film, by the way. The 2024 Austrian film The Teufelsbad, set in 1750 Austria, in contrast, explores the female communal oppression. It introduces its protagonist, Agnes, on her wedding day, enthusiastic and happy about her marriage. As it depicts her finding joy in Gaian and verdant activities, which are very much reminiscent of nature as woman, it will later turn into a refuge for her and haven for when she experiences first symptoms of depression. So her allegorical hunger is wanting agency, and this is suppressed, which then results in depression. The Puritans regarded the soul as feminine and characterized it as insatiable, highlighting how stigmatizing female satiation and desire for excess is not only a global pursuit of the contemporary patriarchal diet empire, but also rooted deeply in cultural and religious beliefs. The teenage female protagonist, allegorical hunger, embodies societal limitations on female autonomy, and how a caged upbringing results in desiring satiation and gluttony. In The Witch, allegorical starvation is depicted through Thomason's entire life, marked by scarcity of resources and the loveless dynamic within her Puritan family. The dying crops and limiting food illustrate her literal and symbolic deprivation, reflecting the consequences of a neglectful and judgmental upbringing. So, I mentioned already the term the Hunger Girl, which is what I'm using in my PhD thesis. I just like it, and it is obviously taken inspiration from The Final Girl. So these films that we talked about right now, they offer a cautionary tale. When women give into their hunger and satiate their appetites, they risk crossing the boundaries from human to monster. This binary of hunger and satiation, of control and excess, reflects the cultural anxiety surrounding women's bodies and desires. Horror films in their portrayal of the female monster mirror these misogynistic anxieties, reinforcing the patriarchal belief that to be beautiful, to be acceptable, is to be hungry, and to be satiated is to be monstrous. Hunger in this sense is intrinsically girly, and it is through embracing this hunger that women can redefine their relationship with their bodies, their desires, and their worlds. The Hunger Girl, while being a new concept I introduced and recontextualized, is a long-standing persona. She who is desired, ashamed, shackled, and finally turned monstrous. Horror films illustrate that a girl can never be human and satiated. Human girls stay hungry and continue to starve, while their monstrous counterparts are able to satiate their cravings and appetite. This highlights the societal limitation placed on female hunger, proving that a girl can only fulfill her desires by embracing monstrosity. Thank you. Questions?
Cannibalism? Could we do that?
Yeah, sure. We have, cannibalism is really interesting because, as already mentioned, it's not one of these monstrosities that is only for the girls. actually one of the most well-known cannibals is Hannibal Lecter, who is a man, but also an educated man and kind of a smart monster to begin with. So when we look at these newer films about cannibalism, which is Bones and All, Cannibal, Mukbang, and Raw, we see that it's different portrayals. So Raw is really interesting because we have, does anyone know any of these three films I just mentioned? Okay, perfect. So Raw is really interesting because we have kind of the same narrative structure like in Ginger Snaps. We have the girl not conscious in the beginning and she's very much prude and not really fulfilling her desires. And then she's also vegetarian. And then she starts med school, and as a ritual, she has to eat the raw liver, which is great. And then she starts having this very animalistic urge to eat meat. First just meat, and then raw meat, and then human flesh. And while she does that as well, there is this sudden urge of her sexual desires and sexual drive. So this monstrosity in Raw is, I would say, it is definitely a great representation of cannibalism, but it's not what I would consider this cannibal monstrosity. Similarly to Bones and All, which is a really interesting film because it's mostly a coming-of-age story rather than a cannibal story, we have our character aware that she's a cannibal, and she's kind of running away from home, and then on this like road trip-like and road movie-like narrative, she finds other cannibals and is not really able to indulge in it, but they do, like almost like criminals. So here the cannibalism is also just part of the monstrosity, but not fully center. It's they run away, they take people, eat them, yada yada yada. But her monstrosity is something she suppresses and she doesn't really indulge in, much like Raw. So they're kind of ashamed of this. Both of these women are ashamed of this monstrosity that they have, of this cannibal, of this urge to eat other people. Valid. Cannibal Mukbang is different, and it's a great film. It's so fun, and it's about a girl who goes on dates and tries to trick people and realizes, oh, these men are really not that great. And then she kills them and eats them in a mukbang and capitalizes on it. And makes money. And she's not ashamed of it at all. She's actually very, like her opinion on this is very strong. And here the cannibalism is, well, it's put in this rape revenge story, and it's very much taking back action and taking back agency and taking back autonomy, taking back control, which is in stark contrast to both Bones and All and Raw. Maybe because both of these films follow more of a coming-of-age story, because the protagonists are younger. But when it comes to cannibalism on screen, I know in literature and in just like contemporary youth in aesthetics, cannibalism is very much, oh, the symbol for love is to eat you completely, which is what you have in Bones and All, spoiler. But there it's not, I love you so much that I have to eat you, but rather, oh, you're going to die, so I'm not going to let you go to waste, so I'm going to eat you, Bones and All. So I think there are different ideas when it comes to cannibalism. Maybe there are some films out there that do it differently, but these three are just this. I don't know, hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, you had your hand up too, right?
Thank you. Thank you first of all for the very amazing presentation of the talk. I have a question, because at the end you said like the monster is able to be fully satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if that is always the truth, because I think the monster is able to take process in the satisfying, but I think often there's still like a repetition baked in, like the hunger is not cannot be satisfied fully. You have to partake again and again, and being like repeating, being the monster, because I think maybe with the crossing the path from being the other, the object, to becoming the subject, but because they're maybe the monstrous feminine, they're not able to fully being satisfied and being at peace, I think.
So you mean like finally consuming and never again consume?
Yeah, like not being compelled to do it again.
Like they're never. I think I know what you mean. I think when I said that in her complete monstrous state, where she's not considered human anymore, she's able to satiate her hunger and her appetite, she's given the opportunity to by the film. Like these films, they don't allow these characters, once they're still considered like pretty and hot and most of the time white, to be indulging in a disgusting behavior. The way these characters eat at the end of these films is disgusting. The way they satiate the hunger is disgusting. And the abject and disgust and horror is very interesting, but only a certain amount of women are allowed to be disgusting on screen, which I think I just mentioned purity like briefly. So sure, these complete monsters at the end of the film are not like fully, finally satiated. Sometimes they might not, but they have the opportunity to, and they're allowed to. And they're never allowed to when they're human. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, well, yeah.
So I was wondering if there's anything of your findings or anything you've looked at when it comes to like consumption paired with self-harm. I think of like body horrors it's like I feel a big topic in body horrors, like consuming but also self-harming at the same time, or like Peter Steners and so on. Is there like a connection with that you've identified?
Do you have a film in mind?
Well, I'm thinking about the substance, and I also watched a body horror of the Berlinale. It's called Saccharin. I don't know how to pronounce that, but it was a pretty similar theme.
Yeah, actually. Saccharin is also on my list. That's cool. So, self-harm, let me just go back to my slide. Wait, where is it? This one? Nope. This one. No. 1 second. Here. Okay. What I kind of skipped over because I thought I would have time management issues, is that when I talked about food being this kind of source people or women are able to control, like poison and also like how to eat, what to cook, yada yada yada, it's also their first choice most of the time for self-harm, which is not in horror but in general. So I think suppressing appetite, that's a form of self-harm, and also binge eating is a form of self-harm, which is what you kind of see in The Substance, where she has this scene where she's just like cooking the most disgusting food you can imagine because her old body, like she doesn't care about her old body, so she's allowed to put these things into her body. That's also self-harm. I think that's my answer. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, just on The Substance, because I was thinking about that as well. I enjoyed the film, and there's lots that I liked about it, but still now I can't decide what I think, if I think the message was well conveyed, because of that scene. I mean, you just referred to it as disgusting food. I was seeing it as delicious food. One of the things she cooks was a meal that I just cooked the week before after a trip to Dusseldorf that was really delicious. Obviously she's eaten too much, and obviously her feeling about the food is that it's disgusting.
Exactly.
That's obviously the point in the film, but I just wonder is it not, like that was the only bit of film I could actually relate to, was cooking and eating delicious food. So is there any way of doing both things without, so like inside the film, the character is horrified by what she's doing, but isn't the film also telling me to be disgusted by what she's doing? I'm not. Am I supposed to be? Is that right? And I just, it's hard to think of good examples of films showing women's relationship to food as a positive thing for precisely the reasons you're talking about. But I'm left kind of really questioning the substance and how it's trying to do that.
Yeah, I mean, there is a reason why it's not on this list. It's because I don't really love it. I can appreciate a lot what it's been doing, but I think especially how scenes like this, where the Demi Moore character, or the older character, is then kind of fallen into this very essential idea of the mad, really angry old woman because she wants this body. I think it's also ageist in a way, but it's not only about the food being disgusting. If I remember correctly, it was a mess in general. Like the entire apartment was messy. She was messy. She was probably disgusting herself. So there was this idea of she is right now this abject form of herself, and she is just not pure. And so everything she touches is also impure in a way. But the way food is presented in the substance, it's very on the extremes. It's very specific and with a lot of thought behind it. And it's just because there's a scene where she's just like eating chips, which is not disgusting, but she's like supposed to be like the most disgusting person, just like chilling on her sofa and eating chips. I'm like, that's a great Friday evening. But I don't know, I think that's kind of it. This idea of how she behaves with this food. Not the food is disgusting, but what she makes of it, which is exactly what you mentioned. Yeah.
Firstly, thank you so much for your talk. It was really, really interesting and very fascinating. I was wondering whether you had any thoughts or reflections on the depiction of hunger and how it's related to the depiction of older women in horror films. Because I noticed that a lot of the examples use sort of younger women, and I know that it wasn't specifically related to hunger, but you mentioned, Rosemary's Baby and Carrie, and they're like infantilized women. And I know there's sort of the trope of scary old lady in horror films anyway. I was just wondering whether you had any thoughts on that.
So, kind of partly to my point earlier, when we have horror films with older women in it, they're mostly the mother. They fall into this archetype of this monstrous mother. We have films like The Babadook maybe that kind of explore a new topic, explore a new feminist gaze, but still fall into this archetype where the hunger and their depiction of hunger is definitely interesting in the sense of it's not the central point of the film. And I wanted to look at films that have this coming of age narrative, which is where I'm coming from. And then I thought, that's a personal interest, which is why a lot of these films have younger characters in the center. But with older characters in horror, they're most of the times considered either side characters, like for example in Suspiria, and then they are always very much just an archetype. They don't have a lot of depth. I wish there were. I would love to include more. Maybe I should include the substance, I don't know. But right now, I have not seen a lot of horror films that depict really like older women, not like 35, but like older women as a character with depth. Which is maybe also the genre's fault.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, sure, thank you. Yeah.
I'll piggyback on the previous question. I'm curious if you can think of any films where hunger and consumption are portrayed pre-puberty. And if so, what does that look like? Is it maybe more universal, gender-based? Is it about consuming a mother's milk? Or like, I'm racking my brain and I'm trying to think of what that looks like.
The only film that comes to mind is maybe Hatching, where you have this bird-like thing. Wait, let me think of the word what it is. Wait, what do you call it when the fairies take your child and they leave somebody behind?
Changeling.
Great. Perfect. That's about it. And then you have kind of this baby almost growing up in a way where it is also very much focused on the mother figure. I can think of horror films that depict prepubescent girls that portray hunger in an interesting way, but I don't think I can think of any right now.
Sorry, just as I can't remember the exact title, but there's the Pixar film with the red panda.
Turning red.
Oh yeah,
And it's
Great.
not really a horror film,
I was thinking of horror film, sure.
but
Yeah,
Which film is that?
it's the animated film Turning Red by Pixar.
She's like sexually awakening and
Yeah.
panda.
No, that's the thing, right? We have a lot of these films where it's about a girl that's just coming of age, like for example in Carrie, then we have the remake, then we have Ginger Snaps, but when it comes to like really young children, I don't think I can name one from the top of my head right now, I'm sorry.
I was thinking maybe The Offspring, but they're neutered, and so it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter then. Like they're just sort of like, they're disgusting goblins. So
Yeah.
it doesn't really work. It's more of a mother thing.
I can also recommend Tiger Stripes, which we showed here a while ago. She's pubescent, so she's not prepubescent.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't remember specific scenes of eating, but I'm sure, I think, yeah, she does some quite
Okay,
extreme,
thank you.
quite monstrous
I'll
eating
check
stuff.
that out.
Yeah. Malaysian film, great.
Okay, cool.
There was a consumption scene in Bring Her Back as well.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's true.
Great point.
Yes.
I don't know if you mentioned it right now, but I'm wondering, could you say something about cat people? Why it's in the list? Because
Yeah, I don't think I mentioned it. Cat People is great. It's this film about a woman from a fictional Eastern European country who comes to the US and she falls in love with a man and he wants to marry her and she's like, oh no, I can't because if I'm gonna have sex, I'm gonna turn into a cat. And it's this kind of thing that sexuality is not only frowned upon but also monstrous and animalistic. And indulging in sexuality means you become non-human. So I have this film in this list because it's not really about hunger, but rather how did society look at women's agency and sexual liberation, which is what I mentioned is like a little bit connected, sex and hunger and this appetite. And at the end of the film, she does turn into a cat. And then she's, yeah, so it's a great film and it also reflects the time greatly because in 42 female liberation and sexuality was very much frowned upon, and so to have a film where a non-American foreign woman is considered monstrous when she indulges in sex is not at all propaganda. Okay.
I don't know if you said this before when you started, but what inspired you to start this research? Was there a specific incident?
I mean, I think it came kind of organically. I did do my master thesis on this research and realized not a lot of people looked at how hunger and consumption is portrayed in horror films, so I thought that's a good thing I could do. I started with horror film studies, then I did a lot on kind of the portrayal of the monstrous feminine as an adolescent girl, which is why a lot of these films has adolescent or teenage protagonists. I did something on Carrie, on The Witch, and how this kind of religious suppressing family is the reason why these girls turn monstrous. Carrie is a great example for that because if the mom would have just hugged her, it would have been fine, but no. And in The Witch as well, it's the reason she is then at the end kind of running into the arms of the devil, which is, I don't think really emancipating, but rather a girl had no other choice, is because her family pushed her away and framed her as this mastermind of manipulation and of monstrosity that she's unable to care for herself. She's like alone in the middle of the woods, everybody is dead, and I kind of did this on these films, like religious oppression in American horror films, and then I went into looking at other films and realized a lot has been going on with how these women look at other characters in both monstrous hunger and also like sexual desire. Like how can we connect that? And then I realized the overbearing term is just like, they're all so hungry. And this is where I am right now.
I have a question for the room. Did anyone here catch Mother of Flies last night?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, are you like
Yes.
with Adams and everything? Yeah, the Adams family?
Yeah.
Yeah, not to embarrass anyone, but Toby's in the room with us. And she
Oh, fucking A!
She doesn't eat in the film.
No, she doesn't eat. She says she is,
Eats the air.
she takes the air in. And it's really great because the two characters also eat, but then we never like fully see them eat. It's just like placed in front of them. It's like, oh, here are the mushrooms, or here is the venison. So that was also really interesting. I thought I catch that.
What do we think about this reversal here? Of monstrosity and eating.
Oh,
That, whether soul big is monstrous, and how that relates to food.
ooh, that's an interesting question.
I mean, it's, and you can, actually, I think that in the film, when they finally, the father wants meat,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, Solveig's trying to feed them nature, which is the continuous cycle of something dying and nurturing, rebirth of more food. And when one of the spells, she goes out and she turns a dead animal into the meat, the venison, when people caught them in the film. And essentially she's feeding them death, which to her is more fulfilling.
That's really interesting. Yes, thank you. That's really cool to have you here. Thank you. Okay, anything else? Yes.
I also wanted to ask about cat people because I noticed in this part of the list it's by far the oldest movie, and then you mentioned Carrie and Rosemary's Baby, which are also a bit older. But most of the other ones that you mentioned are like start around 2000 and then are even younger films or earlier, more recent movies. Would you say that the topic of hunger is something that started to really, I don't know, boom around 2000 and it was not part of many horror movies before that, or is it a topic that goes through the entirety of horror movies as a whole?
I think it's connected to what we see in horror in general. Like a lot of these films fall into this like feminist new wave horror, where we have a lot of non-binary, female directors and writers kind of add to the genre and give us a lot more to work with. What we see in a lot of older films is more, I would say, this kind of allegorical hunger. For example, we have Dracula's Daughter, we have Cat People. It's all about desire. And what we see in this very bodily implication of hunger is when women are allowed to be disgusting. And they were not allowed to be disgusting. Women were very... There was a very interesting depiction of how the monstrous female character was seen on screen. For the most part, she was always killed at the end, or married, or put in an asylum, which we see a lot in, for example, like film noir femme fatales. And when she was actually monstrous, for example, I mentioned with vampire films that she is always kind of this like lesbian vampire that very much just falls onto a homoerotic male gaze. She was never really allowed to indulge in this. She was always just a symbol of like threat to patriarchy. But then she was killed at the end. So hunger, particularly, I would say, there's a lot more to work with right now, just because we have in general a lot more films that do more than just this very much basic narrative of horror and give women more to work with and not just the final girl. But I think we have evidences of it early on, but they're very not feminist. And I look at feminist gaze in film, so.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
It comes to my mind. It's a book actually, but I wasn't wait for the film. It's of Claire Koda, Woman Eating. Do you know this book?
I think I do.
The vampire, a woman who's a vampire.
I don't think I do know it then. I think I had a cover in my head. But
It's just, I don't know, it's come to my mind that I wanted to share because
Okay.
it's actually about hunger and about a young woman who is always hungry and she cannot eat because she's a vampire. She's a modern vampire. It's a place in London, and it's the atmosphere in the book really reminds me to many parts of these movies because it's about this constant hunger, and she's a female person who have to hide her hunger all the time, and she gets somewhere to the butcher place and gets pig blood and something like this.
Okay.
And it's very interesting, and it's like in a kind of way written like, some books you read it and you see it like a movie. So.